Thank you. Oh, well, that's loud. Okay. Guess you can hear me. Most of that was true. Transmedia is a very emotional subject, so if I break out into tears, no, I had LASIK last week, so I'm still, I can't see most of you, which is probably a good thing. You're all just a blur. This table's going to be in my way. We're here to talk about transmedia, and I'll start this off with telling you a little story. This fellow's driving now you'll quickly get from my story, I'm from Texas. This fellow's driving down this dirt road, and he's traveling between two towns. He's never been down this particular road. And he looks off in this field, and there's this, he's not real sure what he sees, and he stops, and sure enough, it's a pig, but this pig only has 3 legs. And that's rather odd, and you can tell it's not a birth defect because he's got a wooden crutch for one of the legs. And he stops, and he sees the farmer coming out, and he says, he stops, "Excuse me, sir, I see you got a pig here, and it has 3 legs. Why does your pig have 3 legs?" And the man says, I'll tell you. That's a good pig right there. That's a real good pig we got right there. He says, you know what? He says, let me tell you how good pig that is. One time I was off plowing down in the West 40, and my old tractor, it just rolled over on top of me, and diesel fuel started flowing out, and that pig was up in his area, and he just rooted out from under that fence and came on down there and dug me out and pulled me to safety right before that tractor blew. Now, wouldn't you say that's a good pig? Yeah, that's a great pig. That's a great pig. I agree, but why does he have only 3 legs? And he said, well, let me tell you, that's a real good pig. He says, you know, me and the missus, we were asleep one night, just snoring away, you know, and we didn't know anything's going on. And sure enough, she said blames it on me, but it was really her. The fire got started downstairs in the kitchen, and the house was on fire. And that pig, he saw it, and he came and rooted out from under the street. He came over there, and he started rooting and making such a big noise that we woke up and saved both our lives, got us out in time before the fire just burned us. That's a good pig. Yeah, it's a great pig. It's a great pig. Why does he have 3 legs? Well, you know, a pig that good, you wouldn't want to eat him all at once. There's a point I will make about that, about the 3-legged pig. Transmedia, how's that for a segue? I have to admit, I really appreciate our host, and yep, it worked, good. But I didn't pick the title. I was supposed to talk about transmedia, but I didn't pick it as revolution. So I hate to maybe rebuff my own title right off the bat. But how many of you have an idea, sort of, do you think you know what transmedia means? Kind of show of hands, sort of, maybe, yeah. How many of you really don't care? I'm kind of that group. I think it's just a fancy name that's really getting popularized and people passing it around and, oh, transmedia, man, click, click, click. You know, and is it a revolution? That's the other question. And one thing that we're going to talk about, and I'm really wanting these 45 minutes, however long I have, to be interactive as much as I can. Please do not hold your questions to the end. If you want to go to the other side, you cannot, but otherwise, it's too late. Please lock the doors. But I do, please interrupt me. I don't care. Let's have a conversation about this if you want. But at the end of the day, transmedia is, and here's the basic definition that most people have sort of agreed on, and that is just any form of narrative, distinctive narrative, that is being told through multiple mediums. And is that anything that's particularly new? And I don't really think so. And I don't know that it's necessarily a revolution. You know, ever since there was, we first told stories. When the very first stories came, you know, we first started telling a story. You got a guy who's, I mean, he and his buddies have been out hunting mammoth all day. They're tired. And they've had some pretty funny stories that happened. They finally killed something. Wasn't a mammoth, it was a bit smaller, but they still want to make it into a story about a mammoth, right? And they come back and they start scratching on the wall of the cave, and the family's sitting around, and they're enjoying their meal, and they've been cooking, and the smells are in the air, and they're drawing these drawings about Leroy and how he broke his spear, and they, you know, they make all their drawings up here, and they tell the story, and then maybe they act it out a little bit, and they stomp around, and they pull out a big bone and show. Of course, that wasn't a bone from what they killed. That's from last week. They keep using the same one, but they. And everybody enjoys the food and the story, and they laugh, and the people around the fire talk to each other about the story they just heard, and they ask questions and interact about the story. It's transmedia. Same story, one narrative flow, basically the same story, told through various mediums. We've been doing this forever. There's nothing new. The key for us, obviously, is the platforms and the ability to then take that and put it in different environments, in different forms of medium. We all know, I won't go through them, I think we all know all the different mediums that are out there right now. We see it, we're familiar with it. There's a lot more coming. As far as the competitors, let's put it that way, for a lot of these mediums. One of the things I was writing a column recently was I think now is the time for the content provider. You guys are most all publishers. You've got content. You've got a lot of tablets out there, a lot of devices competing to be. They can't just say, well, listen, we're better than the iPad because ours does what? It does the same thing. If you notice the ad, for example, Motorola's Zoom during the Super Bowl, they used an enhanced ebook to advertise the Motorola Zoom on the Android operating system. Taking off of Apple's 1984, they used George Orwell's 1984 to show off their book. So they used public domain book. I guess that's public domain, is it? In any case, they used a book and then showed that. But the key is that each of these tablets, each of these hardware devices, they're only as good as the stories that are being told on them. That's how they are going to sell themselves, whether it's Star Walk or any one of these, even the cool ideas that these things will do, there's still a story that these guys talk about. There's still a story that they tell. And that's the key, is that one of the elements that we have, and if we go back to the cave or we go to the modern form of the wall that we write on or the tablet that we write on or that we tell our stories through, the key, the one thing that I want to talk about today, the real key is, and it's what you guys are all holding as publishers, is story. If you don't have a good story, you don't have anything. And it doesn't really matter whether you're writing it on a cave wall or you're putting it on a tablet device or a television or it's through a game or whatever it may be through. The key is a good story. One of the things that really unites us all is our quick understanding of and our relationship with stories. And people talk about the demise of the print book and all of these other things, to me it doesn't bother me, although I love print books. I'm one of the few, and maybe I should say few, probably most people in this room, I'll buy both the print and the electronic just because I want to have the print. I got to have it. But that's a changing world, and we all know that. The key, though, is the story any good? And that has been the linking mechanism for all of us, whether we're from cave through now, is that ability to understand the fundamental arc of a good story. Now, those stories are just as prevalent in marketing and advertising campaigns. We see them throughout. I mean, a story doesn't necessarily, start, middle, finish type of a story or a narrative. A story is also the story of a product, the story of what it's going to do for you, the imagination that you're going to imagine if you engage in that particular product or whatever it may be. When I say the word story, I really am meaning a narrative of some form that can take people from point A to point B. That's really all that we're talking about. And a lot of these of our time is spent, whether it's in marketing or nonfiction or fiction or whatever it may be, obviously is focused on, and certainly in the film side, which is where I come from, is, what's the story? Now, let me take some examples that are well known that we've, and I know that this is books, and I've got a lot of film stuff up there, just about all, I guess, Kathy's book. But the key is this doesn't matter, it's still story. And let's talk about transmedia. I almost don't like the term. But the interaction of how some of these have been done particularly well. And some of you, if you have ideas, jump in and throw in. The classic is Star Wars. Everybody talks about Star Wars. But before we get to that, to me, the pioneer of transmedia storytelling is Walt Disney. He got this early on. He got this early on. Simple idea of taking a particular set of characters, a particular narrative, and finding different mediums through which to tell that and connect with a single, with an audience and found ways to expand out that audience. That genius is really taking those early forms of transmedia and putting it into modern sorts of medium that we can then adapt, from television to film to early form television to film, and then the actual parks and the rides and the interactions with the actual characters, et cetera. Transmedia transmedia doesn't have to just be digital. It's also physical connectivity. When you get people that are huge Star Wars fans and they go to the Star Wars conventions, et cetera, and they stand there or they interact with the actors or whatever else, there's a physical connectivity too. That's also part of that narrative. It's part of that story. Certainly George Lucas has given a lot of in the transmedia world, he's sort of the god of everybody starts with Star Wars. But like I say, I kind of think, George Lucas had nothing on Disney. But Star Wars is a great example, and we think of merchandising. This same subject was just called merchandising not long ago. I shouldn't say that. Certainly the product aspect of it is. Now, there's been new ways of telling story that's not necessarily merchandising, or one would argue that maybe it's not so much that, it's just that what we call a product has changed. It's no longer just the toy at Target, now it's the book adaptation, or it's the graphic novel, or it's some other form. It's not a static particular toy, which we think of in merchandising that they're giving away at McDonald's or whatever. And Star Wars has done that quite well. My son's 6. I introduced him to Star Wars. He didn't really, I was quite disappointed. He didn't really care for it too much. He likes Avatar. He's like, Star Wars looks old and everything else. But what he did like was the Star Wars Clone Wars, the animated versions on television, which takes that same world and expands out on it. That same narrative expands out on it, finds a new audience, and brings them back in. Now, once through the Clone Wars, he now wants to see the Star Wars movies. But he compares everything to the Clone Wars, the animated. But that's really the kind of the classic that people think of as far as taking a storyline. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but another one of the key elements, and I think it's real important right here at George Lucas, is a key element of what seems to work in transmedia is having a central control. Having a singular entity like George Lucas, or if it's a publisher, somebody, the author, somebody who says, we got this. I don't want to jump ahead because we're going to talk about that in a minute. But certainly the key that made Star Wars work was having the singular person of George Lucas controlling all of it and keeping that narrative on its tracks, keeping that storyline focused. Unlike, let's talk about like Terminator series. Terminator starts off great. James Cameron's got its amazing concept. First 2 films, first one's great. Second one, he shows off some technology, does a few more things with the story, blows it out, makes his main heroine a very popular heroine. And then it turns over into other directors. And then you've got the television, the Sarah, what's her name? I just lost her name. Connor, thank you, Chronicles, which did okay, but it was another director and another producer sat. And then you've got the future, and it lost, it's a lot of people can argue, I don't want to argue about it, but some people would argue that it lost its way. That the storyline starts taking on different forms. And it didn't have the control that Star Wars does. Now, for example, what are they going to do? If you're sitting on top of this, could be billion-dollar enterprise, if you own, I've forgotten who owns Terminator now, which studio, but what do you do with it? It's kind of gotten out of hand. How do you tell the story from here? Because we never really continued a particular through storyline. Avatar is an example of what should have been a fantastic transmedia opportunity. I mean, here's a film that went on, multi-billion-dollar product. And I heard some numbers the other day that was sort of interesting. Don't gag on this, but James Cameron's take just from the film was $250 million. That was his particular piece. He gets the same percentage out of the film revenues as he does all the other ancillary products, okay? His take from the film was $250 million. His take from all other ancillary things, $5 million. Which to me says one of two things: a very poorly designed transmedia opportunity. Well, it's poorly designed, poorly executed. I don't know what it was. But now they're working on, because they didn't, the general feeling is the studio underestimated how attractive the story would be and how popular it would be. So now they're working on Avatar 2 and Avatar 3, which won't be out for the first one won't be out for 3.5 years. So how do you hold an audience between there and here, there and there? Well, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people who will still go to Avatar 2 3 years from now. But how much money are they losing by not having a story to fill in the gap and having other opportunities to be able to get out and tell, from animated to graphic novels to all kinds of things you could be doing on the planet of Pandora. You could be telling all kinds of stories, getting people ready for Avatar 2. That is what a good transmedia producer does and should do, is sits in and says, listen, let's see this as a whole narrative. Let's get the audience involved and it's across time. It's not necessarily a singular event. Because for most of these, and I'll come back and we'll talk about some others, and now I'm going to get back to my pig story, finally. For most of these, they have a limited life. The audience will consume them. I don't know if there's going to be more Star Wars, but I don't think so. I think they're done. There's certainly, there is a limited life in being able to tackle that and say, I don't care how good the pig is, I don't care how good this story is, generally it's going to have a life. Harry Potter's a great example. And the idea that a publisher and the producer, which I see in this situation is almost one and the same, or should be, have got to have that vision early on and say, all right, we're going to make this, for whatever the life of this pig is, we're going to eat it slow. Let's take our time. This is going to be a good one. We got to make this right. We make it good, and it's got to last. But we have to have that vision early on. Now let's take Bourne, the Bourne series, for example. Matt Damon made the character. People knew, he didn't make the character. The book made the character. But Matt Damon, as far as most people who haven't read the book or whatever else, they think of Jason Bourne, they think of Matt Damon. Well, now they're going on and making the Bourne film. Jason Bourne's not going to be in it. Matt Damon's not going to be in it. But it's going to be another Bourne movie. People say, well, how can they do that? Well, it's called good transmedia production. Because what they've done is they've gone and they've thought forward and made a plan. Said, all right, you know what? Let's make a bigger world that Jason Bourne was living in. Now, he was just a cog in the conspiracy. We only saw things through his point of view. So let's make a bigger world. Let's make another film that talks about that bigger world, and let's get people excited, because in the next film after that, guess what? Jason Bourne's coming back. And he's now going to interact with the characters that you learn in the next story. That's forward thinking. That's taking advantage of a property that you have and saying, all right, what else can we do with this? The audience loves this, let's take them into this world and let's find new opportunities. I think my hats off. It's a bold project the studio's doing by daring the audience to be smart enough to come out for a Bourne movie with no Jason Bourne. But if it pays off, it'll pay off well. Tron. I mean, I saw the original Tron back in the day, and the new one's wildly popular. They did a lot better and did great with merchandising for kids. They had a good job of that. But what really worked was they spent a lot of time with animated Tron series and other developmental things in between, especially ramping up before this film came out. So a lot of the young people who had no idea what the original Tron movie knew about Tron before this movie came out, because they were building that story world and they were making it available mainly through animated television series. It was a good job, but that takes that central planning. It obviously doesn't happen by accident. There's certainly interactive. There's some ebooks. I threw Kathy's book up there. There's several ebooks on those publishing. Maybe I should spend more time. I was thinking about that earlier before I got up here. I don't think I'm going to talk enough about books, and I really should. But I'm really talking about story, period. I don't care whether it's a movie or whatever it is, because this is where these two worlds meet. But there certainly are some interesting things happening in the publishing world, and that's what I'm working on a lot, and we can start talking about some of those stories and things I'm working on. But of taking books and finding some books which really have other medium opportunities. But I question whether there's a big, the more I've gotten into this, when I first started Ink House way back in the day, 9 months ago? That's a long time ago in this industry. I thought enhanced ebooks were transmedia. And I would argue that they're really kind of not. They're just glorified ebooks. They're not really transmedia, unless you make them transmedia somehow. Unless you can build in that social interaction, unless you can find those other opportunities, unless you're pushing it on into a documentary or a film or something else in another medium and reaching another audience. Otherwise, you have a really cool ebook, which has some other media in it, which helps tell that story and that experience, but there's not a separate experience that somebody else comes in and meets meets this story in a different world. So I put this up here. It's not good or bad. I'm putting up here more or less in contrast and saying, yes, I know there are enhanced ebooks of all kinds of things, and one could debate, well, was the Elements an enhanced ebook? Was that transmedia? Well, it really wasn't transmedia, but it was interesting. It was really cool. We're working on one right now. Some people know on coins. We're doing. Those are really interesting, and we can talk more about that kind of enhancements. But I'm trying to keep my focus on transmedia. There's also like Him, Her, and Them, which is a Facebook film that's ongoing. That's also trying to use social media and film. I don't think there's a book element. Somebody could correct me to that yet, but there should be. The Game of Thrones. We're all familiar with the book. HBO's done a fantastic job of sending out actual physical boxes to certain reviewers early on, physical boxes that they can unpack, and they do videotape, and they tell part of the story. I'm not familiar with the story, I'm sorry, but I know that there's a big cult following of it, and that there's a lot, and they did a lot of pre-work in setting up transmedia opportunities before they ever launched what would normally just been a movie based on a book, which is coming up. So it really comes in all flavors. And one thing I'll pause on real quick before I go to make sure I know where I'm going next. No, you can't leave. Yeah, we're going to talk more about the details of how the process that you go through in just a moment. But one of the things that, for example, we're working on, and these are all big, so let me just jump real quick to an example of a small. I'm rolling through my head right now which one I want to talk about. For example, one large publisher, who will go unnamed, brought me an artificial intelligence book. Well, it's really the concept for an AI book. a book on artificial intelligence. Great video content, interviews with some major thinkers. I do what I do. They come to me with saying, well, okay, what would you do with this? I start thinking, oh my gosh, a lot of people don't understand the electrical grid system or our financial institutions. We could do a globe where you can interact, you could change, you could show how these things could affect people. There's all kinds of things we can do with that. We can take the book, we can show the video clips of the authors, the thinkers on the subject. We can show timelines of how artificial intelligence has changed. We can show interactive graphic. We can get people conversing about it. There's all kinds of things you can do with a really cool book on artificial intelligence, which should be on the latest technology by definition. So we start down this road, this process. I'm telling the story sort of as a small version of how that process, but really tying it in hopefully to the publishing world. And the big problem was the author, and the publisher. But well, the publisher only because they said, okay, go talk to our author and see if he can work it out. I mean, the hands-offness was the problem with the publisher. It wasn't that they were active, it was the lack of, not the doing of something that hurt the project. The problem was the author, and one of the things that the film world has that the book world desperately needs is to understand collaboration, or not understand it, be willing to collaborate. Film world, you don't even think about, you don't go, shoot a movie, shoot it and everything by yourself. It's going to be, pretty bad. But the idea that you've got to collaborate. Well, unfortunately, in this case, this particular author said, no, I've sold my, I've already, I know what I'm writing. I'm going to write this thing and then we'll talk about it. Let's get it published, then we'll talk about it. And my final answer to the publisher was, I'm out. I'm not going to do it. We're out. Because I'm not going to wait. This is a process that we have to start early. And my point of telling this particular story is, I encourage you to work with your authors. It's something that you've got to work early on in the process. To say, okay, because this book has got to work within the flow of this narrative. If we're going to do other things, if you're going to find an opportunity to do a documentary on this particular, if it's nonfiction or even if it's fiction and you want to tie in a documentary on that particular world at the same time you're doing a release, or there's something else that you can figure out how to play, you got to start that early. Or you find yourself shoehorning. And that's usually the place where stuff starts falling apart and it's not very good. It's when you're trying to back into something that's material that's already been out there. It's a lot harder. Let's go forward. I'm gonna watch my time. I told somebody I have the gift of gab. I can ramble on. So how then? How do we typically go about the process? Well, there is no typical. Second, this is brand new. I have to give somebody else said this, I'll steal it from them, that we're, it's building a parachute while you're jumping out of a plane. That's kind of what the transmedia world's like right now. There's a lot of, oh my gosh, wouldn't this be so cool? Let's go do this. Oh, wait a minute, who's going to buy this? How much is that going to cost? And there's a lot of start, stop, yeah, we want to do, but we don't really know, and is this going to sell on the Apple devices? How do we do this technologically? Is this HTML5? What are we going to, it starts bogging down. Oh, and the legal department's got to get involved, and there we got rights, and now we're another month and a half behind, I can tell you from experience. So there's a lot of start, stop happening right now. There's a lot of great ideas, and we're going to see a lot more product coming, but there is which is really a cool time. There's a lot of, like I say, for pioneers. At the same time, there's no particular one way of particularly doing it. But let's just start with the basics. Now that I say there is no one way, now let's talk about the way. But the key is identifying a grand narrative. That's the whole key to begin with. And that's one of the things that I've been working with publishers on, and is saying, is there something here? This is a great story, but this is this particular person's memoir, and I don't know, how are we going to take a memoir and make it into transmedia? Maybe you make a movie on it, but that's not really what I'm calling transmedia. If you've got to start with a narrative that can be blown out, that has a world that enough people will be interested in worldwide. And then again, this is global, we're talking. Scalability to multiple platforms, kind of the same thing. Some of these things are redundant. They're just random thoughts, mainly. Scalability of multiple platforms, being able to go and obviously see that we can do something else here and we can probably do it in an affordable way. No dressed up pigs, not unrelated to the other pig story. It's about, is this any good? It may be a great narrative and say, this would be a great, really cool thing, but I just don't think this author's really visualized this well enough. I can see it in the hands of a different author. I know you've all been there sometimes. We've seen the project and this is really cool, but I wish she was writing it and not him. Imagine what she would do with this. And so one of the problems is that no matter, and I say this a lot talking to publishers, that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yes, with the new devices, the new transmedia opportunities, you can do pretty much anything you want to do. You can do the coolest, outlandish thing, you can spend all the money you want, really make it neat looking. But if it's a pig, it's still going to be a pig. And if the story's not there, if the basic through lines, the writing's not there, it doesn't make any difference. You're wasting money. Immersion. So first, then what we do, or I do, and we work in that, and is basically start absorbing what the story is. If I was sitting down with a publisher, when I do sit down with them, when we decide, okay, we do want to go forward with this, then it's really starting to spend time with the authors, spending time in the story, spending time. We've already decided it's a grand narrative. We've already decided it's a good story. We've already decided it's well written. We've already decided those things. Now we start saying, let's start pushing out the boundaries. Let's find places that the author's comfortable working in. There's got to be a collaboration that we see, and there's the creative and the money. And that's just the same as in the film business. This is film 1.1. This has been around forever in the film world. So we first start absorbing it, innovation, plan and design. We start thinking what toys, all these different toys in our toy box now, what are going to be the best for this particular project. We make sure that we've got a unique point of view, that we do have, and that it's, like I say, a good story. I've already said that. The key then, we talked about this, now I'm coming back to the point about George Lucas, is about owning it and controlling it. Okay, we're going to go do this, but who's in charge? One particular publisher sent me, I got to make this fast. One particular publisher sent on a cookbook we started working on. And I started working with the authors. We were going to do we're going to do something with Food Network. There's some other wheels and pieces in the play. But the publisher wants to sit back and say, do this, because they controlled the original book. And my problem was early on, and it still is, we're in the middle of discussing it at this point, is if you're over here saying yes or no relative to your book and your interest in selling the book, and we're off over here trying to make a television show for these guys, and make an interactive cookbook, and we're trying to do interactive blogs, and we're doing all this, one person's got to be in charge, and it can't be you. Unless you want to get out of your chair and come join us over here in the transmedia elements. Now, this is one of the things I'm encouraging publishers, is to start getting out of your chair. Stop worrying so much about protecting your particular book and start worrying about protecting the whole franchise, the whole story. And join the gang, join the rest. It's not good enough to just have those book rights and be, well, I've got a book. That's what should all matter. Well, can't they go write another book? Maybe you'll be cut out. Maybe they'll find a different publisher with a bigger viewpoint. So, individualized soul installation, that's a Jeff Gomez phrase, but basically inhabiting this particular project with a soul, with a storyline, with a throughput, this beyond the particular one that you started off. Fan, audience, respect, and participation, key elements in storytelling today, especially in the transmedia world, is respecting that audience and letting them be part of it, giving them that opportunity. They may not participate, some will, but to some extent it's making it available. And as that becomes more adapted, my 6-year-old expects to be able to interact like Mitch was saying earlier, his child too, and I'm sure yours too, they expect to be able to interact now, and it's bizarre to them that they can't. They touch the book and it's not doing anything. They can't change anything. Roll out and propagate, that's always a big issue, which has to be thought of early on. It's obviously one of the first questions that I ask when I sit down with the publisher is, who's our money? I'm immediately, where's our money coming from? I know you're thinking that too. I'm joining you with that. It's not as much fun as sitting around talking about the story, not at all, but it's essential. And sitting down and saying, how are we going to market this? Is this going to work through Apple? Is this going to be an Android-only product? What can we do? I've got to move faster. Evolution and expansion, rinse and repeat in new arcs. Being able to visualize ahead new opportunities for those storylines. Key element. Okay, so we've seen that, I've talked a little bit about propelling a story forward, like Star Wars, Clone Wars is a use for transmedia, supporting an existing story, like the Game of Thrones, turning them actually into physical objects and expanding out the story. Outward, like in the Bourne identity, what they're working on, the Bourne series, and what they're working on that to find new transmedia fields to mine. Renewing dead stories like fairy tales, taking old, not necessarily dead, but taking old fairy tales and bringing them forward in new ways. Then bridging between stories is another use, like in the Tron series I talked about, where he took some transmedia and said, okay, we got this book that was out, it's a long time ago, or this movie, and now we want to get to this one. How do we build an audience in between? Arguments against, people say this is BS. Some people say, well, listen, this is just an orchestra playing. You got this instrument and this instrument. They're really all singing the same song, playing the same music, right? And I'm just throwing this up here because I've heard these arguments. And say, well, no, it's really not. It's not exactly that, but I can understand how some people feel that way. They say, well, and there's different analogies. A song sung in a round, same thing. We've heard this one. Or people saying, listen, I don't want one person to be in charge of this. I don't buy sushi at a restaurant where it has 50 other items on the menu. I go to a sushi restaurant. So I want my publisher to do the book. I want my film people, people should do what they do best. I think that's 1990s thinking. I get it, but that's not the way forward in this. You have to have that central core visionary, or people saying it's nothing new, which is what I said at the beginning. So Feedlot Follow lead the money. The issue is money. Where are we going to get money? Freemiums, audience participation. That's a lot of people are finding that in order to get the audience to participate, that's a way of getting revenue in. Product sales. And then at the end, I was talking about the transmedia producer. And that's a new career path. I'm hoping it is. It's something I'm doing. Some people call them, but I encourage publishers and producers, and producers are already heading in this direction, to make, and they've adapted the transmedia producer as a title. And publishers are struggling with this right now. How do we do this? And the key is, I like what HarperCollins and various of the publishers I know are starting to identify this and say this is a particular place we need, and we need a particular person in there with that vision to be able to bridge across both the film and the publishing world. So, fad or future? I don't know. That's the question people get. Is this, it's just transmedia, it's just a fad, or is it the way of the future? And I guess one theme I would just say is, it's nothing mysterious. It's neither. It's always been with us. And the key is, and the reason I harp on that is like, well, so what? I'm not trying to deflate it by saying that. I'm actually trying to inflate it and saying, and yeah, that's right. It's always been with us. And so focus on the key element, and that is story. Make sure those stories are great to begin with. Okay, let me stop there. I know I'm probably out of time, but any questions? Yeah.
Just wondering, I come from a film background, so I kind of understand what you're saying is this. But as you're talking about transmedia, I keep thinking you're putting all your eggs in one basket with this story. In terms of, if you wanted to do something, a product, put it in the market, if it sticks, then I would go in and try and develop it from then on, rather than to invest
Okay, I think I understand. Let me respond real quick because I'm out of time. But yeah, I think I agree. That's all part of that rollout. But if you don't have the vision to begin with, and saying, listen, if this does work, here's where we want to go. Avatar's a great example. Terminator's a great example. This is big franchise, and I'm grabbing big franchises because that's what we quickly can all identify with. But where there wasn't that vision early on, yeah, absolutely. I think part of your revenue control is be sure you don't get out there too far. Test the waters. But there's that balance, because part of building an audience is being brave enough to get it out there and say, okay, but if we only start this small, we may never build the audience we could have had if we started this big. So that's a fine art for each project. Yes?
Hi. It seems that when you're talking about who owns the vision, it seems that the main driver of this aren't necessarily the publishers, but the authors, in a way. Like it's who brings the story to the publisher, unless the story is conceived with or given birth
Right.
within the publishing house, and that's different. But I think what's lacking here is who's the driver, and who's the driver in the central core.
Well, that's why there needs to be a transmedia producer on board somewhere. You've got to find either within your publishing house or somebody I'm a firm believer in that. I just think that's where these things seem to lose vision, is because they do get too isolated. But if you say, well, it's the author, well, the author may, like I was using that example, the author may say, well, no, I'm just writing a book. And the publisher may have the bigger view and say, yeah, I know you're writing a book, but boy, here's some other things we can do with this. Here's how we can tell a bigger story. So having that vision's got to be somewhere. It may be the author. It may be if they're a George Lucas sort, and they say, listen, I have this whole concept here. And that's when I talk to authors, I think there's a great opportunity for authors to be able to come to their publisher and say, listen, I know I've got this book, and it's a great story and all of this, but here, let me tell you what else I've got. Here's this bigger world I've already delivered to you.
Have agents been playing this role?
Agents are moving in this direction. We're teaming with agents. I get agents. I talk to more agents than I do publishers. Agents calling me up saying, listen, I got a client who's got this great idea. The publisher's not biting on it. What can we do? That's actually how the AI one came. But my response now to agents are, okay, let me talk to your author pretty quick, because I don't want to waste time if your author's not going to go along with it. Because you got to build the team. Good agents now are starting to move out of that. But basically they need to move to what film agents are doing. Film agents already do that. They put teams together. They don't just represent that particular person. They represent the process. And that's what literary agents have got to start doing. I'm out of time, but I don't mind as long as nobody hooks me off stage. I know we got to keep going. Any other questions? Well, I'm here, and be glad to talk to you individually if you like.